Welcome to the Pilgrim's Well podcast. Pilgrim's Well is a resource for Christians wherever they are in their journey. We're excited to have you join us on this next episode. Hey guys, welcome back to the Pilgrim's Well podcast. I'm your host, Alex Sikma.
I'm Paul van Engelenhoven.
And we're in chapter 33 of the Pilgrim's Journey, the comforting delights of Beulah land. Now I, Bunyan the narrator, saw in my dream that by this time the pilgrims, having traversed the Enchanted Ground, then entered into the country of Beulah. With the way they passing directly through it, the air in that place was found to be very sweet and pleasant, so they rested and took comfort there for a while. Yes, here they continually heard the singing of birds, while every day they enjoyed the blooming of various flowers in the land, and also listened to the voice of the turtle dove. In this country the sun shines day and night. Therefore it is beyond the influence of the valley of the shadow of death, as well as the reach of giant despair. In fact, from this vantage point, Doubting Castle was quite out of view. Here the pilgrims were in sight of the celestial city to which they were going. Here also they were able to meet some of the inhabitants of that place. For in this land some of the shining ones walked quite frequently, because it was located upon the very borders of heaven. In this land also the contract between the bride and the bridegroom was renewed. Yes, here, as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so did their God rejoice over them. Here they had no lack of corn and wine, for in this place they began to reap in abundance what they had been seeking for throughout their pilgrimage. Here they heard voices wafting across from the city, loud voices proclaiming, "Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your salvation comes, behold, his reward is with him." Here all of the inhabitants of the country called them the holy people, the redeemed of the Lord, sought out, etc. Now as they walked in this land, they experienced more rejoicing than in other parts that were more remote from the kingdom to which they were headed. So now, drawing nearer to the city, they had a much more perfect view of it. It was built of pearls and precious stones, while the streets were paved with gold. As a result of the natural glory of the city and the reflection of the sunbeams upon it, Christian became sick with longing. Hopeful also suffered periodic bouts of the same disease. Therefore they lay for a while in front of this vista, and continued to cry out because of the recurring pangs. "If you see my beloved, tell him that I am sick by reason of love." Yet being strengthened a little, and thus more able to endure their sickness, they walked along the way and came nearer and nearer to the city. On either side were orchards, vineyards, and gardens, with their adjacent entrances being open to enable easy access from the highway. Now having come closer to these places, the pilgrims noticed the gardener standing in the way. So they asked him, "To whom do these good vineyards and gardens belong?" He answered, "They are the king's, and have been planted here for his own pleasure as well as the comfort of pilgrims." So the gardener led them into the vineyards and invited them to refresh themselves with the surrounding delicacies. He also pointed out the king's walks and shady nooks, which he so enjoyed. So there Christian and Hopeful paused and slept for a while. Now I noticed in my dream that they had talked more in their sleep at this time than they had ever done in all of their journey. So as I was deeply pondering the reason for this, the gardener spoke even to me, Bunyan the narrator. "Why are you deep in thought about this matter? It is the nature of the fruit and grapes of these vineyards to be so sweet and digestible as to cause pilgrims such as these to talk and chatter in their sleep." Interesting. So one question that popped in my head is like, where are they at technically in their stage of life? I'm thinking like retirement. Before they die and go to heaven.
I don't know if there was a whole lot of retirement at Bunyan's time. I think that's more of a recent development. Gotcha. I was thinking the same thing while we were talking about this, especially because this is kind of looking ahead secretly into the future of the Bunyan story, that they're still out to cross the river, right? And there's some challenges there in the final stage of their Christian journey.
Okay.
As a pastor, I witnessed this quite frequently, and especially these two things. So I think it might be helpful to talk about that just for a minute. I think they're at the end of their Christian life, and they know the end is approaching. They know they're almost home, and so the confidence increases and longing to be home and be with Christ, longing to be near to God. And for me, as a pastor, who's we have frequent. I frequently meet people in the last stage of life. Often Christians that have walked with Christ, you've had the battles, you've had the challenges, and now you kind of come to the place that Paul says, "I fought the good fight of faith, and now rest for me the glory." right? You've come to that, you know your battle has ended, you know you're near, and now that you know that the end is nearing, you long to be with Christ, and there's a peace and a joy, and it's like God is providing the comfort and the joy and the rest before you enter into heaven. So I would say, so retirement kind of connects with that a little bit, but I've seen people in retirement very anxious in the midst of battles. But it's really, I would say, towards the end of a Christian's walk on earth, when the Lord grants them, they're older now in their faith, and the Lord grants them that peace and that excitement of coming near, and for them, the spiritual truths and the nearness of God and the promises and the surety of the promises become sweeter to them than to them before, and I think than to a lot of Christians on earth. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of drawn out of the world and closely to heaven.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting that this happens like right before, well, they're like, this happens right after their walk in the Enchanted Ground. Mm-hmm. So it's like their first walk in the Enchanted Ground, it's like they most desperately like, oh man, we made it like so far. This is like, we could just rest right here, right now. But it's like the exact place where they're not supposed to rest. And then they're just like, it's like, you're so close. You're like almost there. Like just finish it. And then when they get to the end, they actually come to their true place of rest, or they're getting closer to their true place of rest, or there's like all this like sweetness, but it's actually like real sweetness. Like this is like the sweetness that's not going to kill you, or it's not, it's the actual rest that's not going to be, that's not like deceiving you like it would be in the Enchanted Ground, I feel like.
Yeah, you're resting on safe ground. Right?
Yeah,
in the garden of the king, so to speak.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think part of it that they've discussed all these different Christians in the previous sections. In discussing them, you see the idea that they have gone beyond all these ones that fell away in different ways. Uh-huh. Right? They have stayed the course. They've been faithful to the path. They've been faithful in following God's word. They haven't gone to the left or the right or tried to get shortcuts or easy ways. And now that they've surpassed all of that, even temporary, right? Mm-hmm. They've been continued to be Christian. Now they come finally to the place where there's no turning back.
Yeah.
Right? They're safe. They can rest, and it can take a while, but when they're well and rested, they can take that last leg of their journey that is assured because they're already in the presence of God. Yeah. That's the idea. So, I saw you also kind of being like, what's that chatter? What is Bunyan referring to? And I'm trying real hard like to be creative of what he's trying to talk.
Yeah.
But it might be, like people nearing the end. They talk a lot about the things of God, and sometimes, even in their sleep and even in their thinking, they talk and they just want to talk about God. Maybe he's referring to that, but I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, that is weird how he puts that in there. How the gardener is even talking to the author of the thing, the whole thing. That's kind of like, because you think of Christian as like, wait, the Christian's the main character, so like the story is like around him. But then suddenly it's like the real character is like John Bunyan in a way. Yeah.
In a way, it's funny because all of this John Bunyan writes as a dream. Mm-hmm. And so he sees all these things in a dream. And then obviously John Bunyan does a lot in his dream and apparently talks a lot in his sleep because they just talked the whole book together. So maybe he's identifying John Bunyan as the one who talks in his sleep and has all these vivid dreams that John Bunyan is nearing the end. Mm-hmm. And is in Beulah land, but I'm just guessing.
All right, so in the very next chapter, we'll be continuing on where Christian and Hopeful encounter the river of death. So I, Bunny the narrator, saw that when Christian and Hopeful awoke, they prepared themselves to go up to the celestial city. But as I said before, the reflections of the sun upon the city were so extremely glorious, since it was composed of pure gold. Consequently, they could not look at it with an open face, at least not yet. Rather, they had to view it through an instrument specially made for that purpose. So I saw that as they moved forward, 2 men, or angels, met them, who were dressed in clothing that shone like gold. Their faces also shone radiantly like light. These men asked the pilgrims from where they had come, so they told them. They also asked them where they had lodged, what difficulties and dangers they had met with, as well as what comforts and pleasures they had experienced along the way. So they told them. Then these shining ones advised the pilgrims that they had only 2 more difficulties to deal with before they gained entrance into the city. And Christian and his companion asked these men to accompany them along the remainder of the way ahead, and the shining ones agreed to this. But they also explained that the 2 pilgrims must complete the journey through their own faith. So I saw in my dream that they went on together until they came within the sight of the gate of the city. Now I further saw that between them and the gate was a river, but there was no bridge so that the pilgrims might cross over. Moreover, the river was very deep, so Christian and Hopeful were shocked at such a sight. But the men escorting them declared,
"You must pass through this river, or else you cannot arrive at the gate of the city."
And the pilgrims asked if there was any other way to the gate. The shining ones answered,
"Yes, but no one else has been permitted to travel that way since the foundation of the world, except Enoch and Elijah, and no others will be allowed until the sounding of the last trumpet."
Then the pilgrims began to despair in their minds, especially Christian. They looked this way and that way, but no alternative route could be found by which they could avoid the river. Then they asked the men if the water was all of the same depth. They replied,
"No, you shall find it deeper and shallower, according to your trust in the king of the place."
At this, the pilgrims resigned themselves to face the water. Upon entering, Christian began to sink, so that he cried out to his good friend Hopeful, "I sink in deep water. The billows go over my head. All his waves go over me. Selah." And then Hopeful replied,
"Be of good cheer, my brother, for I feel the bottom, and it is firm."
Then Christian replied, "Ah, my friend, the sorrows of death have totally surrounded me, so that I shall not see the land that flows with milk and honey." And with that, a great darkness and sense of horror fell upon Christian, so that he could not see ahead of him. Here, to a large degree, he also lost his senses, so that he was unable to remember or talk intelligently about any of those sweet refreshments that he had experienced while traveling on pilgrimage. Rather, all of his present talk tended to reveal the present terror of his mind and the fear that he would perish in that river and never gain entrance to the celestial city. Here also, those who were able to stand by observed that he was greatly troubled with thoughts about the sins that he had committed, both before and after he became a pilgrim. It was also noticed that he was disturbed with visions of hobgoblins, or demons, and evil spirits. His words would reflect this over and over again. Therefore, Hopeful struggled here in his attempts to keep his brother's head above water. Yes, sometimes Christian would seem to have sunk down for good, and then after a short while he would rise again, seeming half dead. Hopeful would also attempt to comfort him, saying,
"Brother, I see the gate, and men standing nearby to welcome us."
But Christian would answer, it is you they are waiting for. You have been hopeful ever since I first knew you."
"And so have you,"
said Hopeful to Christian. "Ah, brother," replied Christian, "surely if I was right with the king, he would come to my rescue, but on account of my sins he has brought me to this snare to abandon me." Then Hopeful responded,
"My brother, you have quite forgotten the text where it speaks of the wicked. There's no pain in their death, but their strength is firm. They are not troubled as other men, neither are they plagued like the other men. These troubles and distresses that you are experiencing in these waters are no indication that God has abandoned you. Rather, they are sent to test you as to whether you will recall to mind evidences of his past goodness and now rely upon him in the midst of your present trials."
Then I saw in my dream that Christian was in deep thought for a while, so that Hopeful seemed to speak to him further.
"Be of good cheer! Jesus Christ makes you whole!"
And with that, Christian exclaimed with a loud voice, "Oh, I see him again! And he tells me, 'When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they will not overflow you.'" And they both took courage, and with the result that the enemy became as still as a stone until they had fully crossed over. Therefore Christian now discovered solid ground to stand upon, and so it followed that the rest of the river was found to be shallow, and so they had both crossed over. Yeah, okay, so it seems to be one of their last challenges before they enter the celestial city. But I find it interesting how Christian is like struggling in his faith, but then Hopeful is coming alongside him and encouraging him. And then that by encouraging each other, they can come back to believing and having faith, and then they finally get out of the river. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on this passage?
Yeah, I mean, I got goosebumps while we're reading it. Mm-hmm. I've seen this many times when I'm with people on their deathbed. Wow. Yeah. And so I've, the comfort when I meet them, say 2 months before that they have, and then when their bodies are failing, and they can sometimes whisper, sometimes talk, and then sometimes they'll express a worry or an anxiety, or are all my sins truly forgiven? Those kinds of things. And that's what Bunyan writes about, right? That the reminder of sins come back, like the past reminder of sins. Here you read this, rather, all of this present talk tended to reveal the present terror of his mind and the fear that he would perish in the river and never gain entrance into the celestial city. Here also those who were able to stand by observed that he was greatly troubled with his thoughts about his sins that he had committed, both before and after he became a pilgrim. It was also noticed that he was disturbed with visions of demons and evil spirits. His word would reflect this over and over again. So a lot of times when Christians come to the end, some of them are very peaceful, like hopeful that the river seems shallow. He can walk according to the faith and trust in the King. And others are caught off guard in a sense that even though they're true faithful believers, when they come to the end, suddenly their minds are like, oh, this is different because it's a path you've never crossed before. You can feel your strength fading, and then you suddenly begin to realize, well, it could be heaven or hell. After this, like, can I really make it all the way home, or will I still die and end up in judgment at this point? So, and this is, I think, why this is in the book. It's challenging, it's difficult, there's a disturbance, and I've seen this happen as well, what you see in this conversation, that as Hopeful is encouraging him with truths about Scripture. That's what I do as a pastor. That you speak to people about the promises of God, that you can see the rest return in the heart, right? Where the river suddenly becomes shallow and you can walk again. And it's a river. It's never easy to die, but suddenly there's peace again and there's comfort. So, yeah, this is a wonderful thing that he describes this here, especially because they're in this river together, and technically, that's fair. Christians don't die together. Every Christian dies by him or herself. But the importance of having Christians nearby on your deathbed, or not the importance, but the help that they can offer, reminding people of the promises. And did you notice what made Pilgrim or Christian comforted? Like what was his turning point when he said, I can see, right? He says, I can see Christ again.
But yeah, Jesus Christ makes you, when Hopeful encourages him, be of good cheer, Jesus Christ makes you whole. And then, or Christian was deep in thought, and he says, I see him again.
Oh, I see him again. He tells me, when you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. Right? So Hopeful has talked into his heart and mind, and now his faith is returning as he is reminded of Christ. And by that, the eyes of his faith are enlightened again. And he can see Christ, and then there's rest. Yeah. And that's really, if you ever come to that point of being with somebody on their deathbed, just point them to Christ and remind them of the promises of Christ. Because once they can see Christ again, that's when the comfort returns.
Thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We'll see you again in chapter 35, where Christian and Hopeful are welcomed into heaven. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for listening to the Pilgrim's Well podcast. For more, be sure to follow us from wherever you're listening from, whether it be from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. To find us online, go to seventh-ref.org. We'll see you in the next episode.